A major part of transformational living is being willing to do what God would do, and who God is, He doesn't withhold. He doesn't keep it to Himself. On Grace family, and welcome back to our midweek check-in. So I'm going to do something a little bit different this week, but before we dive into that, last Sunday we did a whole recap and a whole review of level 4, which is transformational living. So I wanted to read a verse that's on sanctification and kind of just get our minds going that way, and then we'll do a little bit of an exercise here. So this is 2 Timothy chapter 2, and it's verse 21. It says, "Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work." So again, this just kind of gives us a picture of what sanctification is. It gives us a picture of transformational living, that if we're willing to give ourselves over to Christ, to be cleansed, to cleanse ourselves from what is dishonorable, we will be a vessel for honorable use. We'll be set apart as holy and useful to the Master, useful to God the Father, ready for every good work. And so that's just an incredible picture. It's so cool what God allows us to be a part of when we talk about that ongoing process of sanctification and continually becoming more like Christ. And so looking back at this last Sunday, we looked at so many different things, and it's kind of a massive topic that can be a little hard to grasp. So we've got that whole series that we can always go back and look at, but what I thought we could do for today is maybe to just simplify it. So I just did a simple acronym for the word transform to just highlight some things. If you walked away Sunday feeling like, man, that was good, but it was so much, then maybe this week, in the middle of this week, we can just do a simple exercise to kind of help us remember what transformational living is all about. And so what we're going to do is just going to take a look at each one of these letters, and just as a reminder of how we can live that out in simple ways. So I don't know if this will help your brain or not, but hopefully it does. So the first thing that we can kind of talk about with transformational living is kind of obvious, but it's time with the Father. It's not just a Bible verse or just a quick prayer on the way to work, but time intentional with Him. You see that pattern of Jesus, of Him consistently going alone to be with the Father. And so while we're there, one thing that we can really focus on is we can focus on rest and remember. So we're going to have rest with the Father, and it's just genuine rest in who He is, but it's also remembering in who He is. Everything about our Christian life starts with who God is, and if you're like me, it's easy to forget. And so when I'm taking that intentional time, I just want to rest in who He is, and I want to remember who He is. And so those two things kind of done together, they lead to the third one, of just being in awe of God. It's just absolutely mind-blowing how perfect He is in all of His ways, how full of grace and mercy and love and peace and truth. It's easy when we remember who He is to naturally be in awe of Him. So the next one is gets a little bit longer, and it kind of shifts gears a little bit. I'll just leave it at that, but it's neglecting the things of the world. If you're going to take notes and write it down, it's neglecting the things of the world. That's kind of the verse that we highlighted. If we can cleanse ourselves from the things that are dishonorable, if we give ourselves over to Christ and say no to the things of this world, that's a massive part of transformational living. So just kind of neglecting that, letting those things go. The next one, if you were paying real close attention, we talked about this Sunday morning real briefly, but I've got sacrifice comfort. And so we looked at a survey of pastors who kind of looked at their congregations and were asked, what were some idols that you see? And the top idol by a large margin was comfort. And if we want to be a church that is making disciples who make disciples, if we want to be individuals in a family that's in the midst of transformational living, we've got to be willing to say no to our comfort. I think comfort in this society means I'm going to build my own kingdom. I'm going to do what I want because this is a prosperous culture. And so I can get what I want when I want it. And it's comfortable and it feels good. But more often than not, that gets us away from the things of God. The next one is forbearance. So forbearance is just kind of a fancy word for patience, but when I look at the whole process of letting God make me more like Him, God is very patient with me. And I think we sometimes need to be patient with ourselves. This takes time. Transformational living doesn't happen overnight. It's not one day I decide I want to be more like Christ and the next day it's all done. We have to give ourselves time. We have to be patient with ourselves to continually give ourselves over to Him and let Him make us more and more like Himself. The next one is ongoing obedience. Ongoing obedience. And so this is just something, again, it's not a one-time thing. It's not just one command to Jesus. I'm going to live that out once, check the box, and I'm done, and I move on. Transformational living it's a lifestyle. It's an ongoing willingness to say no to the things I want to do and say yes to what's greater, what's better, to say yes to Christ and His kingdom and His way. And again, that's got to kind of be a pattern there. In order to be able to do that well, it gets us to R and reliance, and just relying on who God is. That's where we all started. It's time with Him, resting in who He is. And if we rely on who God is, we don't have to become something that we can't make ourselves. We don't have to manufacture something that we can't force, that's out of our control. It's simply giving ourselves over to Him and saying, God, I'm reliant on You. I'm dependent on You. Do what only You can, and continually make me more like Christ. And that comes from Him and from Him alone. And then the last one, which gets us to level 5 of our series, is multiply. A major part of transformational living is being willing to do what God would do. And who God is, He doesn't withhold. He doesn't keep it to Himself. He doesn't just be Him. He shares Himself. He takes who He is and He multiplies that. And then He gives that and entrusts that to us. So the more and more we become like Him, part of that process is telling more and more people who He is. And so hopefully this helps you a little bit. There's so much more that could be said about each one of those. But again, if you walked away Sunday a little overwhelmed, maybe a simple tool like this can just help remind you, here's a few things about what transformational living is all about. And if we live within those, we're going to see some of that growth that God desires in our life. So we did finish with multiply. This next Sunday, we are starting level 5 of our discipleship series, and that is all about multiplying disciple makers. And so if you want to go ahead and look, I think it's Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. We're going to start looking at the teachings and the lifestyle of Jesus within the conversation of multiply. And so it's going to start with who we are. So Jesus is teaching on who we are within that conversation of multiply. That's going to be this Sunday, so check that out ahead of time, and we'll look forward to seeing you here Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Thanks, church.